Did Jesus Christ intentionally set up a kingdom he knew would fail? I'm Brett Jensen, and this is the Word Preacher podcast. Hello everyone, my name is Brett Jensen. I am the Word Preacher, and this is the Word Preacher podcast. I'm excited to get started. You may or may not be aware that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints do not have positions called Word Preachers. That's not a real position. So the first little bit that I'd like to cover is a little bit of disclaimer. It is that this blog and podcast are just a made-up sort of thing. I'm a member of the church. I do not speak officially or authoritatively, and if there's anything that I say that you find a conflict with something that has come from the First Presidency or Council of the 12 Apostles, go with them. They're right. Second, this is a not-for-profit blog and podcast. I'm not trying to get clicks and likes and subscribes. If you want to support what I am doing, please follow Jesus Christ. I also really don't have time for trolls either. If you don't like what I have to say, show me up by following Jesus Christ. That way, one way or the other, the goal of this podcast will be met. That having said, let's dig into some of the things that I wanted to discuss in relation to the Come Follow Me setup, the curriculum. We aren't officially in the New Testament, but looking at what we have in store, looking ahead, I wanted to kind of set this up. And one of the things that carrying over from gospel doctrine from our last year's curriculum for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we studied the Old Testament. And one of the trailing lessons there at the end of the year was on Daniel chapter 2, the dream of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I've always thought that this dream is really significant because most predictions that have to do with the end times, they tend to be either really super symbolic, or they'll talk about conditions generally. And you see those sorts of things in some of Daniel's other writings, in Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus himself talks about the conditions around the second coming, or in the book of Revelation, where there are specifics that are mentioned, but they're done in a really abstract and symbolic way, so that it's tough to assign a timeline to any of this. Now, the vision of Nebuchadnezzar is different from all of these, and I think that's significant. When you look at the image that he saw in Daniel chapter 2, he describes an image with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, a belly of brass, legs of iron, and feet that are part iron and part clay. Then in the interpretation, he identifies Nebuchadnezzar, the kingdom of Babylon, as the head of gold. So we have a starting place. And he explains that each of the other elements that are a part of this image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream represent a subsequent kingdom that will rise to power. It's not really difficult, with the benefit of history, to know what can be associated with what on that image. Of course, Daniel was even alive to see the subsequent kingdom, which is a great story when he reads the handwriting on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Uparsin. That's maybe more an Old Testament focus. But that night, the Persians and Medes come in and they overthrow Babylon. And that's the end of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. After that, it's Persian rule. And there are a lot of people that are in the scriptures during Persian rule. Of course, Daniel in the lion's den is a famous event from that time. Esther was married to a Persian king. After Persia, they were defeated by Alexander the Great. The Greeks became that belly of brass, which started out super strong and able to expand and swallow from the Mediterranean Sea down to India, huge chunk of land before he died, and then the kingdom kind of broke up into sub-kingdoms, and then eventually the subsequent kingdom that took over was Rome, represented by the iron legs. And Rome truly was a kingdom of iron, broke in pieces and conquered many countries in the area and established Western civilization all around the Mediterranean. There was really no empire quite like Rome. Jesus came in the time of Rome, in the days of Caesar Augustus. When you read in Luke 2, that's when he was born. His parents went to Bethlehem in accordance with the first emperor's tax laws. Rome had centuries before it was going to break up into the subsequent partly strong and partly broken set of kingdoms that are predicted by Daniel's vision, or Nebuchadnezzar's dream, rather, Daniel's interpretation of it. Which means the timeline for when this kingdom, the final part of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, was that a stone cut out of the mountain without hands would smite the image, it would fall and be scattered into dust and blown away. The stone would become a great mountain and fill the earth. And the interpretation was that in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So we have a timeline discrepancy. Jesus comes to establish his kingdom during the reign of Caesar Tiberius, was the emperor of Rome, but there were still many centuries of Roman rule before these other kingdoms that inherited what Rome had lost would even appear. So did Jesus set up a kingdom intentionally to fail? This was not the timing that associated with Daniel's dream for when Jesus arrived and set up his kingdom. And I think that's important to think about. What was Jesus' goal? What was he trying to do when he called his apostles and gave them authority? Because that is real. You couldn't just make up that I have authority to act in the name of Jesus Christ. That's a lesson that was learned by the sons of Sceva in the book of Acts, when they attempted to cast out an evil spirit, saying, "We adjure thee by Jesus, whom Paul preacheth." And the evil spirit answered, "Jesus we know, and Paul we know, but who are ye?" And then they proceeded to beat the ever-loving crap out of these guys. They had no authority. So we can't say, well, the kingdom isn't important. It's only, a metaphorical thing. But on the other hand, there is a spiritual aspect to what Jesus was trying to accomplish. When he was brought before Pontius Pilate, John has this brilliant account of the conversation between Jesus and Pilate, where Jesus Jesus explains in this is John 18, chapter 18, verse 36. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence." Pilate therefore said unto him, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. Every one that is of the truth heareth my voice. And so we have a little insight here that there is a spiritual aspect to the kingdom that Jesus established. When he went to Peter and said, Thou art Peter, upon this rock will I build my church. I mean, we can say, yes, it's the rock of revelation, and that's correct. But also, he delivered to Peter keys of the kingdom. It was a literal kingdom. So how do we reconcile this with this timing issue? I think that's worth thinking about. I think a lot of things, and this is not the answer, this is an idea that is worth considering. I invite you to do your own study in the scriptures throughout the New Testament, the Book of Mormon, the Old Testament, and find your own answers for understanding what was Jesus's goal here. But this is an idea that might help you to get started. One of the things that is typical in several aspects of our faith as Christians is paired concepts. We have, for example, in the ordinance of the sacrament of the Lord's Supper, we have the bread and the water, representing two parts of that. When elders administer to those who are sick, they anoint with oil and seal the anointing, another two-part. There are other ordinances in the house of God, or that are found in the Old Testament under the law of Moses, where the priests administering in the temple were washed and anointed. And I think a lot of those ideas that come in pairs should suggest that maybe this is another instance, or if not, at least this is another way to approach looking at this. Another example that I think is significant is that of the accounts, plural, of the creation. When we look at Genesis, and there are a lot of people who do this in the Christian world, that they want to look at the 6 creative periods, the 6 days of creation, as literally this is what occurred. And there are others who want to dismiss it as, well, that couldn't possibly have occurred. We look at fossil records or whatever else, and that couldn't possibly have occurred. But there is something that's trying to be communicated in that. What I think a lot of people on both sides of that argument miss is what is described after the 7th day. A lot of people, in the beginning there was, God created light and darkness. He created a water in the firmament, divided the water above and the water below, caused the dry land to appear, and plants to appear on it on the 3rd day. On the 4th day, the sun, the moon, the stars. On the 5th day, birds and fish, great whales in the oceans, and every winged fowl. On the 6th day, all manner of land animals, and man, male and female, created in his image. And the 7th day he rests. Immediately after that, in Genesis 2, it describes a second sort of creation, where out of the dust of the earth, he forms the first man, Adam. It's just kind of curious, because didn't he already create man? I think that's an important question to consider. Then after that, he forms out of the dust of the earth every animal. He already had created the animals in the previous account, but here he creates every animal and sends them to Adam to see what he will call them, and whatsoever thing he calls them becomes the name of it. And then there's still not an help meet for Adam on the earth. Even though in the previous account of creation, He created male and female in his image. Here, out of the side of Adam, he takes a rib and forms Eve. And then at last, they're able to be together, the man and his wife, our first parents, Adam and Eve. So we have a second creation. He creates man in the first, he creates Adam and Eve in the second. Why? There's sort of an idea that we can gain as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints when we look at the Pearl of Great Price in the Book of Moses and get a little bit of insight that it's talking about a spiritual creation and a natural creation. There's one perspective that can help us understand what's going on here. I think that also can apply to what was happening when Jesus established his kingdom in the New Testament. On the one hand, he was establishing a kingdom. My kingdom is not of this world. Like a spiritual kingdom, a church. He was establishing something that was real, that had authority to call upon his name and invoke his power and cause miracles to happen and bring truth and light and life, the good news of the gospel to all that heard. And on the other hand, in the days of these kings, going back to Daniel 2, in the days of those kings, the inheritors of the Roman tradition, and let's be honest, they lasted a long time. The Roman Empire lasted for centuries, and it kind of broke into pieces, but the Byzantines lasted even after the Romans had fallen, kind of still apart, one of the two legs of iron, kind of still lasting there. But eventually they all kind of crumbled into small little states with various kings that would fight against each other, partly broken. But when the Ottomans and other invaders came to try and conquer Europe, suddenly there were unions and alliances and strong forces, partly strong, that kept them out. People like Charles Martel, who stopped the Muslim invasion into France. Or on the other side, people who stopped the invasion that was coming from the Byzantine side of the Ottomans. These kingdoms lasted for a long time. I mean, they were there at the time of the American Revolution. There were still people a part of these kingdoms. But by the time 1900 rolls around, I mean, they're mostly broken up. They've been replaced by parliaments. Many people have had revolutions. Napoleon has already gone through and swept through a lot of Europe. People have broken apart. These kingdoms were not there at around 1900. So we have between the American Revolution and about 1900, you can see we're kind of narrowing down on this time in which the God of heaven will set up an unfailing kingdom. And I think that's worth thinking about. It doesn't take too much of a stretch to understand God is setting something up in the 1800s. And for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we know exactly what that is. We know exactly how it was restored. We know exactly what its destiny is. That's really significant. So was Jesus intentionally failing? No. He was maybe doing the first part in preparation for establishing the second part in the fullness of times when all things will be made correct. Jesus Christ knows exactly what he is doing. He has always known. It's always been a part of his plan. And I think the more we look into the New Testament and get the perspectives of these people who were there and did their best to help us have these accounts of the gospel, the better idea we will have of what he means for us to do. Of course, next week we will get into the beginnings of Matthew and Luke, and we look forward to being able to study those. Please keep up with your Come Follow Me study, and go to church, follow the prophet, and fight on. I'm Brett Jensen, and this is The Word Preacher.